Hi and welcome to the Composer Wellbeing Collective Conversations. I'm Emily Richardson. I'm a composer agent and music supervisor and a founding member of the Composer Wellbeing Collective, which is a new non-commercial initiative committed to raising awareness and increasing impartial support for the well-being of composers and music creators, with a focus on positive conversation around mental well-being. Check out our website, Instagram and Twitter pages for details on the next conversation, and please get in touch as we would love to hear from you. Today, we're starting a new series of conversations on social media. It's something that's come up during every conversation that we've had so far, and it's a huge part of modern life, professionally and personally, whether you choose to ignore it or not. So with that in mind, I'd like to welcome composers Michael Price and David Schweitzer and PR expert Naomi Belshaw. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. I would like to start actually with Naomi. Your job is PR, but also kind of like all-round support for people in the music industry, particularly composers. How much of a part does social media play in what you provide as a support service?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, it's really a major part these days. The industry has changed so much in the last decade, and with social media growing up in so many different directions, from Facebook to Twitter to, I don't know, YouTube to Instagram and now TikTok, or, everywhere you can go. There are so many different avenues that people can use to kind of share what they're doing, reach out to fans and potentially get involved. So me working in PR, particularly for the last couple of years, you kind of see how much kind of doing a campaign to raise someone's profile or promote their album or something like that actually links to social media as well. So you might get, some reviews, or you might get some features online, but then social media becomes a part of that in terms of sharing it more, and journalists like that sharing. Or even if you go as far as even things like Spotify playlists and Apple playlists, even those platforms like that social media sharing, because everyone's trying to reach audiences and build them, or reach more people, and social media is really a part of that. So it means that it can become an integral part, but then you do want to kind of manage that and work out what a composer wants as well, or an artist wants. And so, yeah, in my work at Wildkat, more on the PR and marketing side, we definitely look at social media a lot. But in my own work at my own consultancy, Naomi Belshaw Consultancy, I kind of look more at the individual and what they're trying to do, whether it makes sense for them, and also consider whether they engage with social media and feel comfortable on it, or whether they choose one or two platforms, or whether it doesn't work at all. Because I think you don't have to necessarily use it, but it can be a great tool if you enjoy it and can get around it.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting that you say that some people it's actually not appropriate at all. I mean, I can hardly imagine not being on it at all anymore. But Michael and David, I think you've got quite different approaches to your social media output. How do you use it in your professional lives?
Well, I think I feel like I've been on the cliched journey with social media over the years. I've always been fascinated by the potential behind pretty much each new service as it's opened up and become more ubiquitous. So I can remember joining Twitter early on, and I can remember having a Facebook page and seeing the what felt like almost infinite potential, but you could tell right from the beginning that there would be some behaviors that would be incentivized that would be unhealthy. I to be honest, I was looking at it personally to begin with, but I think we've probably all seen that those behaviors, when incentivized on a global level, can be incredibly unhealthy for everybody involved. And so I think I've probably spent the last maybe year or two trying to rethink and trying to sort of absorb the surface level of some of the social media platforms so that I can get through to a point where I begin to make my own rules and my own usage of them, and become very confident with the voice that I'm using, so that I can start to see them as an extension of my own artistic work, rather than as a sort of a slightly awkward chore where you're kind of trying to flog something horribly ineptly, which is the equivalent of just sort of walking into a room where you don't know anybody and say, do you want to buy my record, and then walking straight out again, which you wouldn't do.
I think you've totally hit the nail on the head on the way I see it, which is walking into a room and shouting, please buy my record, and then running out slightly ashamed, but knowing that you would also be ashamed if you hadn't done that. No, I mean, I do take your point. I think actually, I mean, it's quite, it's evolved, you know, during both our careers. And I was thinking back, and, you know, when I started out in this kind of business, it didn't exist, you know. I was at the National Film School in 1999 to 2001, something like that. And, you know, social medias weren't, maybe early forms were, but no, they weren't really there. And even, you know, I don't know where, you'll know better than me when it became, I can't even remember. I think some of them I adopted quite early, you know, Facebook and Twitter, I think I was on reasonably early, but but I kind of always have, and slightly continue to see it as if I have, which I do have in my house, a shelf of books which I know I must read, you know, Booker Prize winners for the last 20 years. I go, oh, I must read these books, but they actually just fill me with guilt, and I have that. So occasionally there have been times, you know, when I've actually enjoyed social media. I've enjoyed seeing what other people write, and enjoyed, you know, posting about things, maybe personal, you know, family things or that kind of thing, or professional things, and then having friends, you know, feedback and say, oh, I enjoyed that, or well done, or amazing, you know, I mean, and then you get these little endorphins that, and I can totally see the appeal of that, and I still get it sometimes. I think you get out of practice somehow, and there are times I feel like it's something, and a bit like, in this way, it's a bit like going to a meeting or to an industry event, or, you know, a pitch or something. You have to, I feel, if you don't do it for a while, you have to really psych yourself up, and you get out of practice. And it seems, at the same time, it seems kind of pathetic to have to psych yourself up to write 140 characters or something. And yet it's not, and just, sorry, I sometimes talk too much, so I will stop talking. But the other thing that I think intimidates me about the social medias, which I do use, I'm not kind of, you know, I don't kind of totally ignore them, but I don't do nearly as much with them as I feel I should. But there are two things. One is the kind of audience is so kind of wide and hard to quantify. And so whereas, you know, I've done loads of, you know, and not recently so much, but gigs and things, or, you know, a meeting with lots of people, and you kind of read the room, and there's no way of reading a Twitter room, because, you know, who knows where it's going to go, and you can't keep in your head the combination of friends, directors, peers, you know, everyone and strangers who you're talking to. So one thing is the audience that I find disconcertingly hard to work out, and the other thing is the permanence, which I know some social medias, you know, they have a fade out, but if I, or anyone, post, particularly people with lots of followers, they post something on Twitter, it's retweeted, it never goes away. And I'm kind of conscious of that, and I find that holds me back from saying very much at all, because I think, for one thing, I don't know who's reading it, and for one thing, forever someone can read this.
I don't know if either of you have separate accounts, personal and professional, because I'm at a point now where I was exactly the Facebook generation. Facebook started while I was at university, so I've pretty much had my entire adult life on Facebook. Not as bad as kids now who have their entire lives on social media, but I've had quite a substantial amount of mine on Facebook. And it's weird to think that I'm not saying anyone should, but if you go far enough back on my Facebook page, you will find pictures of me in nightclubs in Brighton, wasted, like on the floor, probably knickers out, and that is bizarre. Like, you know, as you say, it's still there. Probably I was probably going to get rid of it.
How many months ago was that? I mean, that's kind of Christmas time.
Go back like probably a few thousand pictures to find them.
Yeah.
But you know, like it's weird because I all of my accounts, I'm probably most active on Instagram, but all my accounts are the same, and it's weird because I don't, there's no rules, right? There are no rules. So like I post a lot of pictures of my young daughter, and I'm thinking, well, now that I've got a lot of professional, like you know, business contacts who are following my personal kind of accounts, I've got after doing these conversation series, I've had quite a few people start following me on Facebook and Instagram, which is fine. And I think obviously we work in an industry where it's actually okay to be a normal human being. You know, no one's gonna call the police or whatever. You know, we work in quite a liberal industry, but I still feel like, what's my audience? Like, who are these people? Should I be putting these pictures up of my daughter? But at the same time, I have all my family and friends that are my audience. And that's what I do it for, really, is, you know, to show my family and friends what we're up to. So it's weird to think, like, where do we draw the line? Should we be having separate accounts? Do you guys have separate accounts? You know, how much do you feel like you need to sort of censor what you're putting up because you don't know what your audience is? And obviously with both of you, you have a certain amount of notoriety. You know, you are Googleable, you know, and do you how comfortable do you feel about putting your personal lives on your social media?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this as well. I've got 2 young kids, and we made some house rules for myself and my partner about that are individual to us, and so this is absolutely not a judgment for anybody else. But I took the opinion that basically everything that is in public, by which that is my sort of personal Facebook, which has got I haven't got thousands of friends, by the way. It's just my personal Facebook suggests I have thousands of friends, and the page, and Twitter, and Instagram, and old MySpace profiles from the dawn of the internet, that anything, as David rightly says, anything that's on the internet is permanent. And so our house rules are that I don't post pictures of the family, and there's a quite large area of my life which I think I would say is public, which is which I am circumspect in. I mean, I think, to David's point about who your audience is, I think if you do film and TV work, then it tends to grow based on the projects that you're working on, and that gives a certain demographic. So I've done some kids stuff, and Sherlock had quite a certainly a kind of teen demographic, and so I do modify the voice and the tone that I use on social media so that is appropriate, which I might to some people sound like, oh, you're self-censoring, but I self-censor when I go to a family party, and I self-censor if I'm looking after somebody's 12-year-old or 5-year-old, and I don't see that as inappropriate.
I think it's an interesting thing to look at, because if you do look at like marketing advice out there, and like labels or big distributors giving advice to people who are putting out albums and stuff like that, they always talk about what kind of stuff you should put out on social media, whatever the platform is. And it makes complete sense that you want to put out a certain image of yourself because maybe you want to keep part of it private, or it should be private, depending on who you are as a person and how much you want in the public sphere. But at the same time, they always talk about how much should be organic and true about yourself and how much is actually promotional. And it's always about 70, 80% like more personal and only 20, 30% promotional. So you might have an album to sell, you might have concerts going on, or you're doing something like that, but people actually want a personal voice. So it's something that makes it harder, I guess, because if you want to have a private sphere as well, you have to think about how you want to present it. But the thing is, for an audience that might still like particular bits of your music and are a certain demographic, they also want to know a real person. So if you get too much into a kind of salesy kind of pitch about buy my music or XYZ, then you're going to lose people. So it's a weird one, because in social media, people actually want to know you as the person. So it makes it a harder thing to kind of contemplate and decide how to use.
Mm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're in an age now where we're basically all influencers, all of us. We are our own brand. And even for me, as someone who is not trying to sell anything other than myself, basically, you know, my job is to make people like me, make people want to work with me. So there is, as to a certain extent, me trying to sell a brand there, the brand of me. What sort of do you find that too, David and Michael? Does that put pressure on you to find like you're trying to sell sort of a full package? Because I know when I've worked with sort of pop artists before, that has been a massive thing. You know, you actually have to sort of create a full rounded person, rather than, like Naomi says, just someone trying to sell an album. Do you feel the pressure of that on you as composers?
Well, it's interesting, because I have thought about having a separate private account and a work account in order to avoid, you know, the problems of like, oh, here's my kid, and I have 4 kids, but, you know, doing something I'm proud of, and that's for friends, but then, you know, oh, this is a work thing, or this is a soundtrack release that I'm really, and to some extent, and I haven't done that because of, you know, also what Naomi said, partly, you know, I think people want to know the whole person. Then the professional one becomes very boring, because it just becomes a succession of, this is what I've done, this is what I've done. But likewise, I feel uncomfortable. So in a way, what I suppose I've done is I see, as far as I see kind of Twitter, for instance, on one side, I don't do anything personal on there. That's just, and I hardly use it, to be honest, but occasionally I'll post about a project or something, or retweet something related to a project. So that really is just a professional thing. Facebook started as a thing when I had I've still got a young family, but, you know, having kind of babies and then young kids. And that was a way more of kind of seeing friends and things, but then it's kind of slightly morphed, because then you would want to tell those friends about, you know, professional things you were doing, like you're saying, but then, and Instagram is kind of somewhere in between. I'm quite new to that, and I don't quite know where it is, but even on Facebook now, so, I mean, I don't get that many requests, but I get these kind of unknown requests from people who are clearly people who are interested in the music side of things, and I still don't know whether to kind of accept them or not, because, you know, as you said, Emily, there's photos going back with kind of babies, and which I don't know if they should see or would want to see, or I'd want them to see it. So I haven't kind of, to be honest, I haven't worked that out. I suppose in broad terms, I kind of see Twitter, because you can't control who follows you, that's just a professional thing where I might tell people about stuff, but as I say, use it very sparingly. Facebook is more for like friends and family. But having said that, what happens on Facebook is so weird, because when I have used Facebook a lot, and recently I haven't, but you get all these funny little groups of friends. Suddenly you think you're great friends with someone who always responds to your posts, and they're always laughing, and you have a kind of rapport, and you go, oh yeah, you think you're great friends with them, but really they're quite a distant friend. And most of my best friends actually aren't on any of these social medias at all, so I have to pick up the phone or send a text or something. So I'm in limbo. You can maybe Michael can help me clarify these segregations of private and
Dr. Michael to the rescue. So here we are. I think I absolutely hear both Naomi and David's points, and yours, Emily, about where these lines are, because it feels very difficult to decide now to segregate various things, because it's sort of a, there's the past to deal with as well. But I think how I've made my peace with it, and I actually feel fairly comfortable with the decisions that I've made and that I'm making about social media, is that actually where the boundary is between my personal life, my or private life, if I'd like to call it, because I think talking about mental health and well-being, I think it's essential to have a sense of a private space, because within the privacy of whatever you choose to be your kind of safe, unjudged, unseen space, whether that is your very close family or whether it's your very close family and friends, I think it's incredibly healthy to spend time in that environment, and to have that be boundaried so that you're not self-censoring within those walls. So what we say around the dinner table is not for Twitter. You can say anything you like. You can just let go of things, which I think is incredibly healthy. And I've got a number of very close friends and an older brother who I'm close to, who I have those relationships with, where we don't self-censor. We're not kind of prejudging what someone else can say. We're having intimate relationships in that meaningful sense. And I think what I've done is I try and sort of cherish and nurture those intimate relationships, not in public. So I text my brother, I speak to my partner and children over the dinner table. I will have phone calls or meet in person, remember that, with friends, because then it feels like you can have that level of intimacy. And then there's everything that's public.
So I also think it's very important not to feel that you have to be across all social media. So I think maybe if you're an up and coming artist, composer, and you want to kind of see what might work for you, try them out and see whether you like them or not, and whether you engage them. So whether you prefer taking pictures and you're more Instagram and you get on kind of either putting yourself out in public in that way, or you prefer Twitter, or whether people engage with you Facebook, try things out and see what you feel comfortable with. I feel like sometimes people think that they have to do social media and that you need to be across all of them to make sure you're reaching as many people as possible. But I think you want to find something that feels nice and works for you. So even though, sometimes it might feel like a little bit of work to think about what content to put on, but you want to feel at the end of the day, you walk away from it feeling engaged. And I've definitely seen people, especially, I guess, during lockdown, when social media has become even more prevalent because we're not going out to see concerts and do things, people actually leaving their accounts. So they say, well, you know where to find me with my newsletter, or sign up to my newsletter to find out what I'm up to, but actually I'm going to leave Facebook for now. So I feel like you should always, as a composer or artist, do what feels right for you as well.
Naomi, can you give us an example of what you might suggest to someone who actually just didn't like social media at all, and what other ways they could maybe reach their audience? And also, I mean, how much have you found that it affects, because I think people nowadays feel like they have to be on it, otherwise it's going to really negatively affect their reach. How does it? Is that true? And what do you suggest to people who might not necessarily want to be on social media professionally?
Okay, yeah, lots of questions in that. So, I mean, first of all, I feel like there are two ways maybe to deal with it. So if you're not so comfortable doing it yourself, but you feel like it's a necessity where you're at, you could always hire someone to do it for you, potentially, or get a friend to manage it for you to put out what you want. That's one way to deal with it. In terms of how important it is, Yes, I think it can be, but again, you could get a PR agency to be managing your social media during an album campaign or something like that. But it also really depends on maybe what kind of things you're trying to promote as well, and how it matters. So I have spoken to some composers who find that they now sell music over Instagram or things like that, or they get contacted on Twitter for new projects, and they get new commissions and things like that through social media or direct messaging. So that's where it can be problematic. But on the other hand, if you feel it's not really part of something that makes you feel comfortable and it's not going to help your mental health and well-being, I think if you gather a team around you to think of other ways to connect, so maybe it could be through other people's social media accounts, maybe if you have someone who acts as your agent or your manager instead, then you could avoid having to do all of that kind of difficult connection in that kind of more modern way, but still make sure that you don't miss out on the opportunities that are coming through the more modern platforms. But then I still think audiences, when they really engage, they like to sign up to newsletters and things like that as well, and they do want to turn up to concerts. So some of the old media of what we used to do still matters, and buying albums and things like that. So I think it is more difficult nowadays. It's a really mixed picture. There's just so many more things to consider. But I almost feel if you are really determined, actually, if you stay off social media altogether, you could make that part of your brand almost. And that could be something that makes you different. So I feel like there are different ways to do things.
We spoke to Sagan Akinola a few weeks ago, and he said that when he was first taken on for Doctor Who, he actually hired someone to manage his social media, not necessarily for the output, but actually to manage what was incoming, because he thought that that it would be too much for him. He was having a lot of positive stuff, but also a bit of negative as well, and people questioning whether he was the right person for the job, etc. And he just didn't want to deal with it because he thought that it was unnecessary, and it took his attention and energy away from the job. Is that something that you've done in the past as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly feel like we've helped out artists and things like that in the past, where maybe a big story has broken and they didn't know how to deal with it. So it would have been across social media and national newspapers, and they've hired us to kind of try and manage how they react to that. So I can see for someone who is so much in the public sphere like that it would be a kind of better way to manage that helps you personally, so that you're not having to look at all of those messages and those things coming in personally, and you can manage it better and get someone else to help with that. And I definitely think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Michael and David, how do you find that not necessarily the output, but actually the incoming things that you see and read on your social media, how does that affect you and your mental well-being, and how you sort of perceive your success in the grand scheme of things?
David, have you had trolls yet? Have you people trolling you?
I don't know if I don't know if I've had the honor of being trolled, but I'm conscious of, what you said about Sagan is when I've looked at stuff and in the hope, and sometimes, which has been sometimes realized, of very positive things being said about a project I've worked on, and had the converse thing where someone says something, not even meant for you, but something negative about something you've done. And I know some people are easily, brush these things off, or, maybe you've got such a strong sense of self-worth that these comments don't matter to you. But I mean, I find a total stranger saying, I don't really like the music, is like a dagger in my heart, which is pathetic, and so I kind of am wary about looking for that kind of thing. I haven't had people writing to me, as I'm sure that more famous people or pop stars get all the time, going, I hate this that you've done. So they wouldn't direct message me so far. I don't believe anyone's written to me personally on any of these platforms say I don't like something you've done. But obviously there are but even just seeing a negative thing out there is upsetting. On as receiving positive praise for something you've done is really is a really good feeling. But I think the other thing that I was just actually, no, forget that, because that was about something else that's past now. I forgot. Michael, you say what?
Well, I think you make a really good point in that if there are various corners of the internet that you really don't want to go. I mean, just just stay away from them. In the sense of, if you I kind of, when I'm feeling a bit stronger, I think if I want to have a glass of wine at night and read the YouTube comments under things that I've done, I have got only myself to blame. Like, step away from the computer, pull the cable out. And mostly I sort of, I think maybe you get a sense of perspective of the context and authorship of what the words are, which I think is really, really difficult to begin with, because the words are all in the same font and the same size and come at you in the same way. And so you're probably looking at the same laptop screen or phone screen where you text your mum or your other half on. And so to see words that in a sort of visual sense have the same importance, that say that you're a shit composer and your music's terrible and you've spoilt it all and you should stop, then I think it does take a certain amount of energy to recontextualize that and to remember what it is and what the meaning of it is. And I think how I try and deal with it is that I try and be, I think this is the word of this year, intentional. It was mindful last year, it's intentional this year. I try and be intentional about when I feel like I've got enough energy to do that, and also notice when I really haven't, when I've got nothing left. I don't want to process the sort of the levels of context in order to make sense of either a good, because you look at the first time I put something up on YouTube and there was an instant comment saying, "Great work, man, love your page," or something like that. And I properly thought, oh, that's really nice. And of course it was a bot. It wasn't a person. It was just an automated thing searching around the internet.
Nice bot.
Yeah, exactly. That was a positive bot, which is easily the best kind of bot, I would suggest.
I have a question linked to that. Like, if you think about kind of slightly older world and critics out there and like official reviews, which still exist,
yeah,
compared to like any audience member, anyone listens or can see your stuff, also now becoming essentially a kind of reviewer. How does that compare, or how does that feel? Because you still have critics out there, and maybe they're more known names, who will sometimes, kind of rip your work to pieces, even if it's just a personal opinion. And I know there are actors out there who deliberately don't read reviews of things and things like that in order to protect themselves as well. I mean, it's a just interesting thought now as the world's moved on. Yeah,
I mean, my response to that would be, well, the response after a couple of glasses of wine would be, fuck them all. But actually, the sort of more reasoned response would be that it's sort of a free speech response and a distancing response, that that the society is organized in such a way, and social media is that people can say what they want. And if we're gonna, as composers or artists in general, or just people, if we're gonna try and police that, if we're gonna try and affect and control and say, well, you can't say that to me because that's mean, to 9 billion people at the same time, you're gonna burn out in a heartbeat. So it feels like there's a release from sort of going, there's sort of there's some of the some of the critical reaction to some of the projects that I've been involved with has been, shall we say, mixed. And so it's in the same way that you can let The Guardian slagging your show off go, as much as a real person, perhaps a sort of like a film music blog might not like what you've done, and then just somebody who's listening who has no sort of professional connection. I try and hold on to the fact that everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I'm also entitled to not read it or listen to it, and I'm allowed to turn it off. And that's that sort of balance. Yeah, obviously I can remember word for word my first bad reviews that etched into my heart. I've got them tattooed actually. Mike Price can't write his way out of a paper bag, The Guardian. But
I mean, the thing is, for us doing this job, I mean, it's not the hardest job in the world, let's face it, but it has its challenges. And, I sometimes think, there's a kind of roller coaster of things that you go through on nearly every job. Some go very smoothly, but, you're excited at the start, you write some things, maybe they work in the first stage, but then it all gets thrown out, the whole program. You've got all these kind of other things you're working towards, essentially pleasing directors and producers, also pleasing yourself along the way. Just doing those two things is quite hard enough. And then you get to the end and you kind of just want to go like, that's it. That's, I got through that job. I didn't get kicked off. Everyone was happy. They say they would like to work with me again, blah, 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 whatever you kind of take away from it. But then you've got this other layer of critics, both, like you say, whether it's the Guardian or the Telegraph, or you've got everyone being a critic. And I mean, I'm not sure whether, I mean, I look there sometimes but I rarely get happy, not because people are always horrible, but just because one negative comment that you might see, and it might be from a 12-year-old, but will outweigh 5. I mean, there's a thing in kind of BoJack Horseman recently where he says, and he gets told 10 nice things about him and 1 negative, and all he can remember is the negative thing. And that's kind of how I feel like, and maybe it's, different characters. I've talked to TV producers, who I've worked with, or directors who say, oh, I love watching my programs live with Twitter and, seeing what they think. And I'm like, but if lots of them are negative, doesn't it? Oh no, it's kind of interesting, So I might just not be created for a social media world in that way, or maybe I can toughen up with Naomi's help or something.
I don't know. I you've got to be really confident to I just get the feeling that anyone who says, oh, I can read a load of negative comments on social media and it doesn't affect me, I feel like they're lying. I think it affects everybody. You're completely right. I was going to mention that point earlier, is I think it's just human nature that you can have 10 good things said and you'll always remember that 1 negative comment. I think it is just human nature. And I think it's down to insecurity, and to a certain extent, I mean, on different levels, we're all insecure in our work and we're all worried that we're not doing a good enough job. And as soon as someone points it out to us, then it's almost like it's just reinforcing that insecurity in our own minds.
But yeah, but I think we've all this, someone taught me this phrase several years ago. Now it's very gone mainstream, but of imposter syndrome. And I think most of us suffer from it, and in some form where you always feel you're going to be found out as a fake. And I think what it's hard not to do is take that one, say you've got 10 really nice comments and 1 negative one. It's hard not to see the 10 ones as, oh, they're just being polite. And that rude one, that's the one who's really seen through me and knows. And I think, obviously I've had those reactions and bounce back from them. It's not like it crushes me completely, but it is why I kind of tend to approach it warily, all the social medias.
I mean, I think that's where you need a really good support network, whatever it might be, whether it's like a professional one or whether it's even just your home one, so that you can go away from those comments and not take them too much to heart. Or if it really is too difficult, then maybe engage with social media in a different way if it's going to constantly put you down, I think.
it's almost as if you need to sort of differentiate in your mind the sources that you actually genuinely believe, like the opinions of, and care about the opinions of, and then sort of try and block out everything else. So in some ways it's sort of like the way social media has grown, it is a fantastic tool, and never before have people been able to engage so directly with their audience, but at the same time you have to accept that audience is all, they're all going to have an opinion, and that can get to you directly via those via those connections on your Twitter or whatever. And like you say, everyone is now a reviewer, and before you only really had to deal with the professional opinions, but you know, in the Guardian or whatever, and now everyone is a reviewer, and it's kind of like you almost have to sort of think, well who are you to give your opinion, and should I take it to heart, because do you even know what you're talking about, you know? In terms of, we've had this sort of conversation a little bit before, where we've sort of mentioned that social media is a highlight reel, and it's interesting talking to, obviously both Michael and David have both had negative reviews, and it's so easy to believe that you're the only person that ever gets negative reviews, but everybody does, and it sort of plays into this sort of highlight reel and only showing positive things on social media. And I know that I think everybody is guilty of that, me included. But how do you look at your social media and have that in the back of your mind, or do you feel like you see something, or see your competitors or other composers in the industry and look at them and think, oh God, like they're doing so well, and that, you know, there's nothing, they're not getting any negative reviews and they're getting all the big jobs? Does that affect you, either of you, Michael or David?
Well, I think there's two strands in that, and I think one is comparison to peers, and I can do that perfectly well without social media. Thanks very much. I can find out who's got the film that I really wanted, or who's got the record deal that I wanted, just by phoning one of my gossipy friends. And so that sort of that instinct of everybody else is doing better, for sure. I mean, you can sort of mainline it if you want to scroll through everybody's feeds to see what awards they've won and you haven't. But that to me feels like a familiar feeling, and perhaps slightly magnified, but not a particularly. It's as grim now as it was before social media, and you have the same solutions to it, which is to not look at that, and also try and encourage yourself to be satisfied with the abundance that you already have. And then there's the second side to that, which is how you interact with social media, in the sense of what your voice is, what your conversation is. And so I think I feel like if you're sort of, you know, back to that metaphor of walking into a party and just sort of banging on about yourself, then that way of interacting on any of the platforms is going to generate a certain sort of either people ignoring you, or a certain kind of interaction back, just sort of, it's kind of reflecting you back on yourself. And so I've been trying to find ways that I enjoy. So I've enjoyed doing a bit of lecturing over the years, and mentoring some people, and sort of sharing stuff that is not for commercial gain. And the same bit of me that enjoys doing that, I find a very pleasant voice to speak with and through on social media, because it feels like it's not a commercial message. It's also not a sort of a, what do they call it, stealth bragging, or sort of, you know, kind of a
Humble brag.
Yeah, humble brag. That's it. I love that, humble brag. It says like, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I've run out of polish for all my awards. You know what? And which is sort of, you know, I think when people get called out for that, I'm kind of, you know, I'm not surprised. Whereas if genuinely the same sort of spirit of interaction that would have taken you out to have a coffee with someone who is, is kind of wanting to have a chat about stuff, that sort of openness, I find that a voice that actually I'm comfortable with, and then sort of seems to play okay on social media, because genuinely you are trying to engage in a conversation, and you might learn you might learn something yourself, and so I think that, yes, you've got to be careful to not compare yourself unfavorably with other people, and the human design of a lot of these platforms encourages that, but there are ways to deal with that. But also, if there is an aspect to any of us that finds sharing the experiences or what knowledge we have, or what experiences that we're having naturally, if you have a way to do that offline, then you can probably find a way to do it online in a way that feels okay.
Mm-hmm. And you've done that through your Composer Coffee Break series as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, that was entirely spontaneous. The one the thing that surprised me about it, so for anybody who's not seen them, at the start of the lockdown, I did a series of interviews with friends, other colleague composers, and I hadn't really done too much on YouTube up to that point, because I'd worried about it not being good enough, and I'd worried about the quality not being good enough, and I thought I didn't want to just be a talking head, not having a conversation, because I find those narcissistic and irritating when other people do them, mentioning no names. And but because we were all locking down, it was like, well, everybody's in their spare room right now, and I'll just do a rubbish, technically pathetic, badly lit conversation with some people who are also in a real situation, and that felt really freeing, because I got to have a conversation with, I think, I don't know, probably sort of 30 or 40 people over the run of the series, all of whom were more or less close friends, but all of whom are closer through having an actual real conversation. And I learned tons. It was a favorite thing. It's quite a lot of work, as everybody on this call will know. Putting all these things together is non-trivial. But I thought, I think that there's a bit of a sort of shift of consciousness, again slightly jargony, happening at the moment about the way that we communicate, that lockdown has brought to the fore, because we're having to find ways to be intimate and to have real, authentic conversations within a public framework. And I think it's fascinating. I think we're sort of evolving slightly, very quickly in 3 months. I think if you measured our brains, the speech patterns would be slightly different internally.
I think we've had the same kind of experience, really. I think it's been just the nature of being able to have these sorts of conversations and getting people together relatively easily that you probably wouldn't have necessarily been able to before, if you were trying to get everybody in one place geographically all at the same time. The lockdown has sort of helped with that, because now people can just sit in their, like you say, sit in their spare room and jump on a Zoom call, and there you are. It's a conversation that can be recorded and put out and publicized. Naomi, what sort of obstacles have you sort of seen, and also how has COVID kind of changed the landscape for you in terms of PR?
Quite a lot. I mean, I guess the main thing that's definitely happened is, obviously, with all concerts and performances disappearing, like a lot of clients kind of had to shut down for a while. So conductors, we couldn't really do anything because they were no longer touring, or something had to stop touring. Some artists that we were going to promote what their next concerts and events were going to be, we couldn't do anymore. I guess, interestingly, because I also used to work at PRS for music, I've always thought it was quite interesting recently how everyone's going into albums and how much more important Spotify and Apple is now. So we went from a position where live performances were making so much more money for artists and composers, to suddenly now switching back to the kind of recording industry suddenly being that much more important. So definitely at Wildkat, we've seen a lot more people now thinking about their albums and wanting to put them out sooner, or just wanting to put content up there digitally. And then what's been harder to deal with, but really interesting, is obviously all artists and performers wanting to do digital streams, and also festivals. So lots of festivals we were working with would want to digitally stream what they're doing, and you can see that with orchestras and everything else. But there's been so much content put out there, is how do you get it noticed? And that's been really hard. And then it's also been really difficult because everyone's been affected on the other side as well. So you're trying to get in touch with journalists or get people interested in what is still going on, even though it was in lockdown. And some of them, quite a few, were freelancers, so they were no longer working, or some magazines you might have seen have started to fold, or some are really reducing what they're doing or stopping reviewing for the moment. So it's been a really difficult time to manage and work out who's left. Some magazines even being just run by one or two people and still trying to get their attention. So it's been a really interesting, difficult, but manageable time. And there's definitely stuff still out there. I mean, there was a point where journalists only wanted to talk about COVID. So you had to find an angle which involved COVID to get their interest. But now it's shifting back to music. Now they're much more interested in what's happening online. Albums are still getting to #1 and still getting a lot of traction and things like that. So it's starting to find a way. I think what is harder though for a PR person is how you kind of keep those connections going with some of the journalists. Because obviously you'd arrange meetings, or you might see them at events and you'd be able to network. Now you're trying to hassle them over Zoom or trying to call them. They don't really want to do that because they probably want to concentrate on the actual writing. And as a PR company or an agent, you're kind of more trying to sell something. So that's a bit harder. But definitely we're finding ways to shift, and festivals and things like that, it's more about the marketing now. So they're trying to get audiences to go online and potentially pay as well for concerts and events. And now maybe live things are starting to come back, socially distanced. So it's probably the next stage now. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think like I said before, it's kind of it feels like it's easier to get people on the phone, on Zoom or whatever. But I think also it's easier for people to sort of cancel now as well, because it just feels like a sort of virtual reality. It doesn't feel real. I think cancelling a face-to-face meeting has a lot more weight to it than cancelling a Zoom call. And I think as easy as it is to get someone on a call, it's probably it feels a lot easier to cancel that as well. And I know that, I mean, it's the job that I do, I rely so heavily on meeting people face to face and building a rapport with people, and that has been I found it very, very difficult to do online or on a video call. I just there is something that is just not the same as being there with someone. I don't know whether it's body language or, you know, just the vibes of being, you know, with the energy with being with someone physically, but it is a lot harder, and I think everyone is struggling with that.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I was just going to say that I feel it's particularly present when you're trying to make new connections. So I feel like people you've already had connection with, now having to switch, you already know them enough that you remember what they were like in real person, so that you can continue that rapport going, and you're kind of catching up on how life is now. But when you're trying to make those new connections, build other things, that's where it gets to be more of a struggle, because you can't have those.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like anybody who I've spoken to who I've not met and I've only spoken to on Zoom, I feel like those connections feel very, very fragile at the moment, and I feel like I need to follow them up with a coffee as soon as possible. How do you feel that COVID has affected social media? I think it feels like we've almost just streamlined everything now, because we've had to, because we've been forced to. Do you think this online culture is going to continue after COVID, or do you think we're going to go back to how it was before?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I feel like I've definitely seen maybe some people being too present or trying to do too much content. So they're trying to redress the balance that they can't be out there with their audiences anymore. And I'm not sure if in the long term it will be healthy or right. So maybe there'll be some people who go back to what they were doing before. But I think for other people, they've learned to engage with it better and build a better following through the kind of social media context and learned how to use it a bit more and to their advantage. And I definitely know that there are people out there who've been as interested in knowing what composers or artists are up to during the lockdown and kind of seen that engagement, so kept in touch with people even though they haven't had events to go to. That's really made a difference. I still wonder whether that will continue afterwards, if we return to our old normal. I mean, it all depends what happens, but I feel like that, again, that kind of whole thing of seeing people in real life, really connecting with people, I still think technology is not good enough yet to provide that same experience or feeling that you get from that. So I still feel like social media can't replace, but I feel like there might be more ways to connect when you can't in the meantime. And certainly from my experience in classical music, I'm kind of really hoping that a lot of organizations and groups really pay attention to what you can actually do with digital technology. I feel like they were always really slow to catch up with how to use it and were ignoring it. And now it's been the only way to get stuff out there. So I think you might see some changes there, which means that maybe it might increase the audience interest in that sector, which is interesting.
David and Michael, have you acted any differently on social media during lockdown, or have you noticed any of your peers acting differently during lockdown? More or less content from your fellow composers?
I don't think I've done anything different. If anything, I've been a bit more, I've stood back from it even a bit more. I've been fortunate enough to be very busy. I'm actually very worried about the live music industry and friends I know in theatre and all those kind of things. And I know lots of people whose careers are, you know, very much in the balance at the moment. So, but luckily, I mean, I think as media composers, we're kind of less affected because things, I mean, some productions have halted, but as it happens, I was working on quite a few documentaries and an animation thing, and they were all at a stage where they could carry on. So I've basically been really busy through this period. I was working at home. I've moved back into my studio now. And mostly I've just been writing rather than having things come out. Things are coming out kind of soon that I might want to. So, but really, I have been conscious that to avoid the what Michael described as the running into the room and shouting about yourself and running out again, it's probably in those times when I should be tweeting something interesting that I've done, or you know, something I'm excited about, rather than just waiting till something's come out that I'm really happy with and then tweeting. But in order to avoid that kind of syndrome, if you like. But I think really when the truth is that when I'm happy, and a lot of the time, in spite of the lockdown and having 4 kids at home and various other challenges, I enjoy, what I enjoy is actually doing the work. And when I'm involved in writing music, it's kind of almost the last thing I want, to be pulled out and have to tell someone about it. So I haven't actually looked at that much. And just going back to an earlier point that Michael said, he said, oh, well, it's always been there, the thing about comparing yourself to others and other people's achievements and looking at, I think that is true, but I do think that it might be, and maybe this is to do with the blurred lines of social, you know, personal and professional interactions, but I might look on absent-mindedly Instagram or Facebook, just I don't quite know why, but I suppose I'm just seeing what my friends up to, or and then you will be bombarded with some peers who are saying, oh, I've got this thing out. And it's true, you might kind of vaguely know about it, or I've won this prize. And I don't mind, you know, I don't kind of resent other people, but immediately from going to like, I wonder what my friends are up to, you're suddenly questioning, you know, oh, you know, that's good, they're doing really well. And I do think I'm sure that, I know that you're right, that people, and it's not a good way to behave on social media to constantly blowing your own trumpet. But I have this slight worry that actually it does kind of work for people who do constantly blow their own trumpet or humble brag, or, you know, and it's obviously you need something to boast about. And if you go, oh, you know, I can't believe it, me and John Williams and Ennio Morricone in the same award, what an honour. I don't deserve, you know. But and you do need something. But I feel like the world takes things at face value much more than. I mean, I think of my parents, for instance. If someone's gone, if one of their parents got, oh, so and so's doing really well, then that'll come back to me. It won't come back to me like they were boasting about their child. It will just come back going, so and so's doing really well. And I think the world sees someone saying a constant stream of successes on social media and goes, wow, they're doing really well, and I do it. And yet I do know plenty of either I know them socially or I know of them, composers who do very well who don't ever post anything, and so I don't know how necessary it is. I got one job. I mean, I don't know which jobs I've got have been influenced by social media, but I was amazed about 5 years ago to get a job, and it wasn't an amazing job, but the director said, oh, you know, we had a Twitter exchange 2 years ago or something. I was like, I hardly ever use Twitter. I couldn't remember this thing, but he had asked me something on Twitter and I'd replied. And 2 years later, I got, you know, a pretty good job. Maybe not, obviously not entirely through that. So I know that it can be used for that. And some people maybe get loads of jobs. And maybe I, you know, as I said, I've been lucky enough to be busy lately, but you know, maybe I'd get much better or more job offers if I was constantly doing things. But in answer to your initial question, I haven't done very much in the last few months. And I've sometimes say I'm going to take I'm not going to look at it at all this week. And I haven't noticeably been less happy when that's, when I've done that.
I just want to say to that, I feel like maybe social media is a bit like PR. Like you can put stuff out there and you can be blowing a trumpet or you're mentioning what you're doing or put up a video or something. And it's a bit of sometimes a bit of luck whether somebody important sees that or recognizes that and then thinks, oh, actually, I've got a great project that this composer would be great for. And I've definitely seen with like PR campaigns and stuff like that, someone had done a video or we got them onto a magazine thing that ended up being a YouTube video online where a producer suddenly got in touch from a part of the industry that this composer didn't know before, all because of something that wasn't planned, and PRs like that. And I think social media kind of is part of that as well. So I don't necessarily think you're missing out, but you don't know what the possibilities might be. So it could be interesting to be there.
Mm. Yeah, I think we're all just still learning, aren't we? And I think it's just a learning process. I think maybe in the way that we might read like a tabloid newspaper now and take everything with a pinch of salt, you know, that's how we need to be more with social media. And we need to know that, you know, not everything is a reliable source. And, you know, people aren't posting, people might, you know, be having great success in one area, but not so much in the other. And of course, they're not going to post about the negative side of things. So you're only ever going to see people's highlight reel, as we've said before. And I think our attitudes towards it and how we deal with social media, I think it's just a learning curve. And I think we're all still getting to grips with what we should put on there, what we should take from it. I mean, I remember Facebook, you know, when it first came out, if I look far enough back, me and my friends have full-on personal conversations with each other just in public, like on our Facebook walls, and we thought that was completely normal and fine, and now you would never ever do that. So I think we are gradually learning, you know, what we should be putting on it, what we shouldn't. I think we are finally realizing that we have a global audience, whether your profile is private or not. You know, you're going to have people on there that you've completely forgotten follow you and can see exactly what you're doing. And I think yeah, we're learning and we're evolving, and hopefully, I know it is a very useful tool, and it's bringing the world much closer together and making connections much easier, and being able to reach audiences on a level that we've never been able to before. But at the same time, obviously, it's causing problems that hopefully we will learn to deal with as we go along. I'm I think we're going to wrap it up there. It's been really, really interesting talking to all of you. Thank you so much, Michael, David, and Naomi. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.